Welcome to Take Off Your Shoes. My name is Reverend Marie Duquette. I'm an ordained minister in the Lutheran tradition, and I believe that where my story, your story, and God's story meet, there is holy ground. Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered him, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Last week I ended the reading. I added on some verses so that we included the story of a child who was possessed by a demon and Jesus casting that demon out and healing the child. So when I read this Sunday's gospel, I imagined Jesus running into the devil in the desert and thinking, "Not you again," right? It just keeps coming up. And now it ends with the devil is waiting for an opportune time, which means they'll run into each other again. And then Jesus will think, "Not you again." What comes to mind when you think about temptation? What tempts you? I think what we often call a temptation isn't really a temptation. We think about temptations as a struggle between ourselves and some other thing or person. We're tempted to have another glass of wine. We're tempted to have another piece of pie. We're tempted to describe our husband or wife or child or sister or brother or friends in absolutes. You never. We're tempted to see ourselves in any given moment as great or awful. I've come to realize that my temptations aren't a struggle between me and some other thing or person. They're a struggle between me and me. It's the struggle between the divisions and contradictions within myself. It's the struggle to clarify who I am and the values that orient and drive my life. It's the struggle to show up to my life day after day exactly how I am, and not run away. The ongoing question we must ask ourselves is this: who do I choose to be in this moment? It's the name of a book I've been reading on the history of the rise and fall of civilizations. It's given me some solid guidance for now. Who do I choose to be in this moment? This morning I read a story that worked in here. It was about a 3-year-old and her father going to the beach on vacation at the break of dawn. And the father is telling the 3-year-old, "Isn't it so beautiful? Look, the sun is coming up, it's pink, the gold is on the water, it's making it look like there's stars dancing on the water. It's so beautiful. I love you. He says to his 3-year-old, I love you like the sea. And the 3-year-old says, Dada, stop talking now. Right? The reason it's important, this little story, is because I would be willing to guess that by the time she is a teenager or certainly graduated from high school, she will no longer be willing or able to say, stop talking, if she is in a moment where she is just looking at how beautiful things are and she doesn't want to be interrupted. She will not be able to say that because she will have been conditioned at that point to sacrifice truth for politeness. The struggle with ourselves is a necessary part of gaining a deeper understanding of both ourselves and the God within us. If today's gospel teaches us anything, it teaches that the Spirit of God leads us into places we don't want to go for longer than we didn't want to be there. That action might lead us to believe that God's Spirit is not kind, or not helpful, or not compassionate. And yet the Spirit that leads Jesus to be tempted is also the Spirit that descended upon him at his baptism. It's the same Spirit that Jesus baptized others with. It's the same Spirit that filled Elizabeth and Zechariah so they might bless and prophesy. It's the same Spirit that came upon Mary, Jesus' mother, so that she might conceive the Son of God. The same Spirit that in the beginning swept over the face of the waters when God first said, let us make humans in our own image. And when God had done so, God said, it is good. Did you know that another valid translation of the word good in Genesis is beautiful? Imagine, and God made humans and said, they are beautiful, every one. It seems that wherever life and creation are happening, the Spirit is present. What if that's true about our temptations as well? I suspect that the Spirit of God knows we each need to struggle with ourselves, and that through our struggle, we become more of who God made us to be. Scripture tells us that Jesus was in the desert for 40 days. You all know that 40 days is shorthand for a really long time. So maybe our struggle in learning, accepting, and living into who we really are takes a really long time. I'm guessing a lifetime. Imagine if instead of speaking of yourself in disparaging absolutes, I am too fat, I can't speak in public. Someone else says I am not enough, so they must be right. What if we defined ourselves by both our strengths and our weaknesses, not judging them, just knowing they are part of who we are? There is something called the shadow self. It describes the parts of ourselves that make us feel guilty or ashamed, the things we would not confess to anyone. It refers to our less noble inclinations. And ironically, the more we deny the shadow self that we have, the more it tends to grow within us. Knowing ourselves as one whole human, including the parts we try to hide, leads us into seeing others through the same lens. The more grace we give ourselves, the more grace we have to give others. Many people are at risk right now of being persecuted, oppressed, having violence committed against them, not because of what they have done or haven't done, but because of who they are, their very essence. Take transgender folks, for example. To be clear, transgender is this umbrella term for people whose gender identity, expression, or behavior doesn't conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. In other words, they don't conform to society's expectations of what it means to be a girl or a boy, a woman or a man. We as a society have put all kinds of baggage on babies, children, telling them what they should like, what they should play with, what they should wear. Society's conditioned response to categorize everything as this or that, good or bad, right or wrong, normal or not, has led to transgender people today being bullied and even killed. When we ask ourselves, who am I? Who do I choose to be? And when our answers lead us into accepting whatever we learn about ourselves from asking those questions, we become more compassionate about letting others do the same. To lean into exactly who they are. To know that by God's design, there are parts of ourselves we don't fully understand, but we can't deny them. And when we can do this for ourselves, we're better able to do it for others. Maybe this is at the heart of what it means to love one another as ourselves. The temptation into which the Spirit leads us is to practice not forcing ourselves into some preconceived notion of perfection. It's less about trying to work on our self-discipline or consistency or denying ourselves so that we will be more or less of what society sees as acceptable. It's more about embracing the parts of ourselves we are reluctant to admit. And the more that we do this, the more we are able to live peacefully in our own skin. Jesus was led by the Spirit in the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days, and after that, he knew. He declared himself to be anointed by the Spirit of God, to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. These are the first words he said in the temple when he came out of the desert. And he did this with no apologies. Now, you know, some people surely thought he was full of himself. Some accused him of blasphemy. Some thought he should be knocked off his high horse. Some thought he should die. Still, the reason he came out of the desert to proclaim something as audacious as naming the oppression in the culture in which he lived and proclaiming a new day in which these very people were held in high esteem by God was because the temptations he faced in the wilderness clarified his understanding of who he was. I suggest that this Lent can be a time of reflection and examination in which we look at who we are becoming, how we are living, and where our life is headed for the sake of deepening our relationship with ourselves and with our Maker. Because as long as we make our temptations about some other thing or person, we never face or deal with ourselves. Giving up dessert or Facebook, committing to read the Bible more, expressing our gratitude daily, those are worthwhile pursuits. There's nothing wrong with any of them. But I wonder if they're all just a distraction and a way to avoid looking in the mirror and seeing ourselves more completely of doing the harder work. This avoidance teaches us to settle for being at odds with ourselves all the time. It's a source of anxiety. And most often, the way we deal with this friction is we project what we dislike about ourselves onto other people. It's so convenient. There is a truth that the very thing we dislike about another person often exists within ourselves. So one way to practice this, making peace with ourselves this Lent, is to consider, who do you dislike? Who drives you nuts? And how is that person you dislike like you? If you don't walk away from the question, if you stay with it, you will find it. I think our greatest temptation is to turn away from ourselves, to flee our own life, to settle for a shallow or superficial life, to sleepwalk our way through this world. Is that really the life you want? Is that what you want to teach your children and grandchildren? Is that the legacy you want to leave this world? Are you content to skim the surface of life, or do you want to dive deep? If we want to dive deep, if we want a life of meaning, if we want to begin healing our hurts, then we have to face the temptation to avoid and deny and run from ourselves and our life. God does not save us from our temptations. God saves us through our temptations. What parts of yourself or your life are you avoiding or denying? Is it your prejudices that you don't fully understand? Is it your desire to control what others think or feel? Is it your tendency to lean into an understanding of God that is easy and convenient instead of challenging and transformative? Maybe you don't want to grapple with your free-floating embarrassment or shame or guilt, your fear, your wounds, your pain, your self-doubt, your disappointment, your unmet expectations. Maybe you avoid thinking about the things you grieve or your ongoing desire for recognition, praise, or perfection. Maybe you're haunted by the things that you could not fix, and to this day you beat yourself thinking you should have. Maybe it's the dreams and thoughts that keep showing up and asking something of you that you are afraid to give. It's not just the negative parts of ourselves that we avoid. Sometimes we even avoid the very best of ourselves. Maybe it's your own goodness and beauty, gifts and abilities, or a deep longing and desire. Maybe it's a calling, a dream, or a life you never thought possible and gave up on years ago. And when people who love you encourage you to act on that dream, you say, nah, I can't. I'm too old. No matter how far or fast we run, we can never get away from ourselves or our life. Maybe that's why the Spirit persistently leads us again and again into the wilderness where we have to face ourselves, because this is how we deepen and clarify our lives. Jesus doesn't overcome his temptations. He uses them to understand at a deeper level who he is and what he has been called to do. It's less a choice about what he will or will not do. It's more of a choice about who he will be. And once we are really clear on who we are, all the other decisions that we face every day become a lot easier. I will be a person that stands up for other people who are being hurt. Good example. In this moment, we don't have to fuss with, I'm scared, I shouldn't get involved, I don't even know them. We stand on, I am a person who stands up when other people are being hurt. Jesus doesn't say no to the devil's temptations because he's smarter, better, or more holy than us, although he is. He says no because he refuses to violate or betray himself. He will not turn away from himself or run from his life and his destiny. He makes a choice about who he will be, what matters most to him, and how he wants to live. By God's grace, by God's love, not for us in spite of who we are, but God's love for us precisely because of who we are, we are able to make that same choice every single day. Thank you for listening to Take Off Your Shoes. Let me send you out now with this blessing. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, and grace to remember the world is now too dangerous for anything but the truth and too small for anything but love.
If you're still listening, she held your attention. Give her a thumbs up and subscribe. Watch the video on her YouTube channel. Search on YouTube for Take Off Your Shoes with Marie Duquette, Duquette.